On today's episode, we'll be talking about a house with two spirits, haunting photography, and sleep paralysis. These stories and much more on this edition of Paranormal Mysteries. Thank you all for joining me once again, and welcome. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I hope everyone's been having a great week so far, and before we start today's episode, I'd like to thank John for their support and generosity. And if you enjoy the show, please consider following, sharing, and reviewing the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to discover the show. You can also support us by becoming a patron at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries, or by donating at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. And if you wish to have your paranormal encounter shared on the podcast, please write to me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, or by visiting our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. Or if you'd prefer to record your experience and send it to me, you can now do this on our website as well. You can also visit speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries and record your story there. And don't forget that all of these links are in the show notes. And with all that in mind, our first listener story comes to us from Stevie Lee. Stevie Lee says, "Hi, I'm from Australia and I love your podcast. I wanted to share a story from my past with you in hopes that it makes it on the podcast. In 2014, me, my mom, and two brothers moved into a new house on Norfolk Street. We refer to it as Norfolk House anytime we retell the story to other people or amongst ourselves. The house didn't seem too old, and we guessed it was built earliest in the 50s, which is why we at first didn't believe the amount of paranormal activity that it harvested. Before I go on, I have to make it known that my family moved into this house the day after my father's funeral, and after being evicted from the house that we grew up in. So my family and I were not only grieving from a death, but also grieving the only home that we had ever known. I have heard that grief or strong emotions can trigger paranormal activity, which is why this house may have been so actively haunted. Lots of things happened in this house over the few years we lived there, and strange things would happen almost every day, but some things were more obvious than others. We believe there were two spirits in the house, one that we named Alex, who was always there and liked to play tricks, and there was one other who we agreed felt like an old, scary man. He wasn't there all the time, but when he did come, it was terrifying. Alex the ghost would always play tricks. He would lock us out of the toilet and bathroom, make the blinds go up when we were having a shower, but that was only with the girls. He would move things to strange places, hide things, bounce balls, and turn lights on and off. One day, I was standing in the kitchen making food, and you could see to the very end of the hall from the kitchen, being that it was a small one-story house. The end door was my mother's room, and this is a detail to remember for later. Anyway, I thought I saw my teenage brother running very quickly down the hall towards me. I started talking to him as I continued to make my food, but when my brother got about 2 meters away from me, I looked up while I was still talking to him, but no one was there. I soon realized I had seen Alex the ghost sprinting towards me, thinking it was my little brother. They looked very similar, except I distinctly remember the figure wearing a bright blue t-shirt, which once I looked back, I found extremely odd, considering that my brother only dressed in black. My brother's girlfriend on a separate occasion also walked past my mother's bedroom and thought she saw my little brother sitting on the end of her bed, with his knees to his chest and hood on covering his face. But when she took a second look, he had disappeared, and that's when we knew for certain that the ghost looked like my little brother. We told my mother of what we had seen and how it looked like my little brother. And once we told her, she was shocked and told us that it might be the child that she miscarried, who would now have been a young teenager. And this is when we named him Alex. We didn't know if this was the case, but we just rolled with it, since the spirit Alex didn't seem to be of any harm. There was one time that we came home after getting KFC, and every single light in the house was on, but all the doors were still locked as we had left it. Lights that we hardly ever needed to turn on were on, such as the backyard light, the hallway light, laundry, garage, and toilet. No one was home, and the house was left locked. Things would go missing all the time, and one time, when we all used to smoke, the lighter went missing. It was the only one we had between me, my brother, and his friends. We searched meticulously for this thing for at least 10 minutes, and when one of my brother's friends offered to go buy a new one, it was found standing upright in the middle of the table that we were all sitting around when it went missing. Alex did lots of things like this. My brother and his friend witnessed the bathroom light physically turning on and off on another occasion, and my other brother witnessed a ball bouncing by itself in the garage. We put most of these things down to Alex. Now let's talk about the more sinister spirit, the old man. He was not there all the time, unlike Alex. He only seemed to come about once a month or so, but when he did, there was a big shift in energy, a heaviness that seemed to watch everyone, and it was almost as if Alex left when the old man came. Everyone felt a distinct shift in energy, and me being a little bit spiritually sensitive to feeling mood, I could tell. My brothers heard banging coming from my mom's bedroom when they were home alone, so they opened her door to see my dad's rocking chair swinging forcefully and hitting the wall. They didn't go back in the house until my mother got home from work. This was the work of the old man because it felt different, less playful, and more sinister. When walking down the hallway sometimes you could see the shadow of the old man kneeling and peeping through the crack behind my mother's bedroom door, if her door was left halfway open. Everyone in the house witnessed this at some point, but my mom and I were the first to see it. Every time the old man was around, I was plagued with nightmares about furniture being thrown at me and being dragged around the house by demons. None of which happened, thank God, but the next incident scared me so much that I moved out shortly after, leaving my family behind. My brother is an Eminem fan and had an Eminem CD in the stereo, which was in the lounge room. I lived there during my pregnancy, and I was about 8 months pregnant and walking from my room through the lounge room to get to the bathroom, when the stereo in the lounge room turned on by itself at full volume, and the first lyric that came on was, "Mama had a baby, and its head popped off," which is the first lyrics of one of Eminem's songs called Evil Deeds. I was home alone at the time, and this of course scared me to death, not only because I was pregnant and the lyrics used felt like an attack, but also because this was the 5th or 6th song on the album, so whatever made it turn on had to have skipped a few songs to get to that exact song. I moved out with my partner shortly after that incident. There was also an instance when the old man was around that my brother came into the room where my family were sitting and chatting. He was trying to speak to us, but it sounded like gibberish coming out of his mouth. We were like, "What the hell, bro?" just thinking that he was being weird, when later the next day, he told us that it was uncontrollable, and he was trying to speak to us to tell us that he felt dizzy, but the words coming out of his mouth didn't make any sense. He went to bed frustrated right after we were all laughing at him and thinking that he was being weird on purpose, and he fell asleep being annoyed that he couldn't communicate with us. We discussed this recently and all agreed that it felt like it could have been an attempt at possession, but we don't strongly believe in that. We believe in ghosts, but have never had a reason to believe in possession or demonic entities. Who knows, maybe it was just the heat, being that it was summer. There were many more incidents in that house, and my family moved out shortly after I did. We lived in separate houses for a few years, and now we are back together again in a new shared house. We believe Alex has followed us to the new house, or followed my little brother anyway, since I lived alone with my partner for 3 years and nothing paranormal happened. But once we were all together, it seemed to get active again. I am thinking that the old man did not follow us here, and I never want to experience a spirit with such negative energy and hate ever again. None of what I have told you is made up or intensified in any way, and if anything, there was a lot more that happened, but it would be too long if we went into detail. Every time we tell someone new, they think it seems too crazy to be real, and no one ever believes all of it. But I swear on my life that none of this is made up. And that is the story of living at Norfolk House. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Regards, Stevie Lee. Our next story of the night comes to us from Kyle, and Kyle's story is called Sleep Paralysis and Nightmare Experience. Kyle says, "There are 2 experiences that stick out to me from over the years. One was during a bout of frequent sleep paralysis I had immediately after I graduated college. I think it was from all the stress I'd just dealt with from classwork and then the stress of the next steps in my life. My father and stepmother lived next to a church in rural Pennsylvania. I stayed there overnight every Saturday because I was the organist for Sunday services, and it was easier than commuting early in the morning. His house was an old 2-story farmhouse. It was refinished and well furnished, but still had old locks, creaky floors, and a slight mold problem in the basement. One thing to note is that there was a garden outside the exit of the church that had a statue of Jesus. His left hand had fallen off. It was supposed to be holding a Bible, and his right hand was actually pointing directly at the second floor of the house. It was intended to point towards the sunrise, and it was just a coincidence that the house stood between. I stayed in the guest room on the second floor, and their room was on the first floor. One Saturday night, I was tucked in ready to sleep. I was on my phone in the dark for nearly an hour until I grew drowsy and was ready to drift off. My thoughts turned to recounting the day's events and what I was going to do tomorrow. Before long, right as I was totally passed out, a faint radio static-like noise came into my ear. I would hear this every time I was slipping into sleep paralysis, so some nights I would actually be able to shake myself out of it. Strangely, I never awoke into it. I always went through it right before I would fall asleep. But tonight, it was too late though. I couldn't get out of it. My whole body was frozen and numb, and I could hear the static grow louder. I tried hard to fall asleep, but the more I tried, the louder the static grew. Then, without warning, I felt a cold pressure in the middle of my back. I was laying on my side, and this pressure actually forced me onto my stomach. I then felt a half a dozen limbs wrap around me and force me onto my other side. I tried shaking them loose, and I tried screaming, but I couldn't do anything. Just when I thought it would leave me alone, it pushed hard on my back, and I fell off the bed, taking some sheets and a pillow with me. The force of the fall completely broke my paralysis, and I was able to scramble onto my feet. I turned on the lamp on the end of the table, and I saw that the bed was nearly stripped, with my bedding scattered on all sides. The door was wide open, and the hall light was on. Both odd, because my stepmom diligently turns off every light in the house, and I recall locking the bedroom door. My heart was pounding, and I was certain that I was having a panic attack. I then grabbed a pillow and went downstairs to sleep on the living room couch, right outside their room. The next morning, I woke up to my father asking why I was sleeping on the couch, and I explained everything to him. He just chuckled, brushing me off like it was just a nightmare. He lived there a couple more years, and I played every Sunday after, but I never slept in the guest room again. My other experience was a particularly vivid dream I had during the same period of time in my life. In this dream, I was on a picnic date with a girl in the middle of the forest. We both wore very fancy clothes. Me, a black suit, and her an ornate pink dress with lace and buttons. She had a decorated umbrella with her as well. Very Victorian for some reason. The forest consisted of tall trees with thin trunks. They were laid out symmetrically in a perfectly spaced grid. You could see far in all directions, until a fog obscured the horizon. Straight ahead, decently far away, we could make out a small shadowy figure moving between the trees. It went back and forth, coming closer with each pass, and eventually I could make out that it was someone riding a bicycle. Still far away, but slowly moving closer, it would pass from right to left and then out of sight. Now left to right, and then out of sight again. We never saw it turn 180 degrees at the end of each pass. It was just going in and out of our sight. Soon we were able to see that it was something riding an old bike, like the kind with a large wheel at the front and a small wheel in the back. We could also see the details of the figure riding. It was a bare skeletal figure with a white ram's skull for a head. Its eyes were two dim lights cast from the hollow eye sockets. As it weaved between the trees, it never looked forward. It always kept its gaze on us. For some reason, we couldn't leave the picnic blanket, despite badly wanting to run away, and my heart started pounding as the ram's skull cyclist got closer. It disappeared into the fog after completing the row right before our blanket, and it didn't show for some time. We both were on edge, holding hands and darting around to see where it would come out. Suddenly, it jolted out of the fog, barreling down the row of trees towards us, and it was moving multitudes faster than before. Just as it approached the blanket, it reached out its bony hand and grabbed my date's hand. It pulled her completely off the blanket, and they both disappeared into a plume of ash that floated upward into the treetops. I woke up in a cold sweat and wasn't able to go back to sleep that night. Our next story of the night comes to us from Chris. Chris shared his story with me via a link to his Spotify page where he has uploaded a few of his experiences. And after talking with Chris, he informed me that this story took place in rural New Hampshire. His story is called, "Do Not Enter the House."
This is by far the most involved experience I've had in terms of paranormal variety and consistency. A lot of this information is vague remembrance, but I'll do my best to write only what I know is the truth. I'm unsure of exactly my age, but I was somewhere between 15 and 17 when we visited this home. My mom is a cleaner for rental properties and homes to be sold. My dad is a jack-of-all-trades kind of man with a lifetime of experiences. They both worked for this property management company, doing cleanings and repairs for summer renters and potential buyers. Me and my siblings often tagged along in these jobs to help or learn. However, this job was the first of its kind. My dad was referred directly to the customer in this instance, which was uncommon. He had to receive phone calls from the guy trying to sell the house, as he wouldn't explain much about what he wanted done to the company, aside from bare minimum. This was odd, but most inhibitions relaxed when his request came forth. All he wanted was pictures taken of the outside land and the inside of the house, but it was certain specifics that threw us off. He wanted the photos printed and given to the company to be mailed back to him instead of emailed. Lastly, he gave one final demand: do not enter the house. Me, my mom, my dad, and a few family friends went to the house to take said pictures as requested. A quick survey of the land and a few pictures into the windows from the outside was easy. My mom and our friends waited in the car as it was February and I believe close to 13 degrees outside. The house was up a hill away from the main road and with a large empty field out front, so the chilling wind was miserable. I opted to keep my dad company while he circled the house, and to help call out points of interest to take photos of in case he missed something. The house was a large 2-story cottage with multiple horse stables out back and a tall, crumbling grain mill. It's impossible for me to describe the exact shape of this house all the way around, but it had some extreme oddities. For example, following the right side of the house away from the front door was a porch, all painted white and decorated with old chairs, crushed tables, and a red, broken kid's tricycle. But between the porch and wall of the house was a rounded little outdoor hallway made up of exterior walls that led to the abrupt dead end. Only about 6 feet deep, but the shingled roof pushed over the lip of the building and nearly touched, creating a shadowy canopy. The weirdest part was this hidden nook had a single window that looked into the house. Looking into this window, you would see nothing too out of the ordinary: some household furniture strewn about, an open living room plan, and a staircase leading upstairs. But on the floor directly inside this window was a trapdoor, long like a regular door that was lying down and much too thin to be easily accessible, but easily concealed under a rug. The window was old, rotten, and the glass was yellowing. It had the lower right pane smashed out, and within reach on the inner sill was an old bottle of rat poison. My dad took a photo of the closed trapdoor and rat poison, and then we moved along, not thinking too much of it at the time. We looped around the back of the house with little to note, eventually making it back to the front where my mom and friends waited patiently in the warm car. I was freezing at this point, but elected to take a few pictures for him. I wanted to help. He handed me the point-and-shoot camera and returned to the car to warm his hands. Now, as far as we were made aware, this house had been unplugged, meaning no water, no electricity, and no one living there for something like 10 or 15 years. This information was brought to the forefront of my mind when I approached some windows. I looked inside to see the living room full of furniture, paintings, boxes, and just a general mess, but not entirely unlived. It looked more forgotten by this mysterious owner. Maybe hurriedly so. Maybe inherited. I don't know. I'll never forget moving close to the living room window and seeing almost chicken fence-like bars on these windows alone. Red in color with gaps big enough for you to slot your finger in. I got close enough to the windows so I could focus the camera past the bars and take a few pictures of the couch and the other furniture. I only managed to take a few because I was suddenly freaked out by a gust of flies smattering the glass. I jerked back and glared at them in disbelief. It was absolutely freezing outside, as I said, and the house was supposed to be dead for years. Flies inside made no sense to me. But there they were, hugging the fogged glass, interested in me. I backed away and moved to a different window. The room I came upon was almost like a hub, smaller in size but containing many doorways to other parts of the house and a staircase in the middle. The stairs ascended up 10 or so steps and then split off left and right, rounding up and over your head to the second floor. The room I looked in had only one thing in it, besides the stairs. One single rocking chair. I took a picture and left. Now this is where things get strange. We got home that night and my dad starts printing the photos as requested. I was in my room, I think, playing Dragon Ball Z or something when he called out to me. I found him at the computer with a short stack of photos in his hand. Furrowing my brow, I asked him what was up, and he simply showed me the printed photos. Now my dad doesn't get spooked. He's been through a lot, he's seen a lot of things, but I could tell by the look on his face that he was genuinely disconcerted. We took pictures of other rooms through the windows, but I didn't mention them because they weren't important up until now. In these empty bedrooms, we could see birch trees bleeding through the walls, like a bad Photoshop. It was certainly weird, but I figured that this was just a printing issue. Problem with that is we never took pictures of any birch trees, or trees in general, outside of maybe something in the background of one of the horse stables, but these trees showed up as if we took them within feet of the tree line. Besides, we knew it wasn't a printing issue because the trees were different in every picture. Also, in one picture of the kitchen, there appeared a massive cast iron wood stove, something my dad noted was from the early 1800s. We never saw this wood stove anywhere in the house, so it truly confused us. But then my jaw dropped when he showed me the next picture. In that little outdoor nook, the area with the one single window and rat poison, the photo he took of the trapdoor through the window, the trapdoor was open. It hinged upwards in the photo, nothing visible apart from the black rectangle leading down into the assumed basement. An abyss of pure mystery. Because when we took the photo through the window, the door was closed, very clearly closed. In the photo print, it was wide open for all to see. Within the week, the photos were sent out as per his request. A tight deadline to be met. Seeing as my dad only had the one memory card for the camera and he used it for many things, the photos were deleted. After all, there was nothing strange about the photos themselves. It was only when we printed them that strange things occurred. It wasn't long after that my dad received a call from the guy with a request to take more photos. Something like a week after the first visit, just my dad and I returned. First, we looped around the house to the back, rediscovering that nook and window to see if the trapdoor was actually open and maybe we imagined it somehow. Again, we were absolutely stunned when we saw the trapdoor closed. However, the old, yellowed window, placed forever ago in the now rotted frame, was fixed. Or rather, was never broken. The bottom right pane was whole and filthy like the rest. Whereas when we visited just a week prior, it was smashed like somebody punched straight through it. Additionally, the bottle of rat poison that rested on the inner sill within reach of that window pane was just gone. We thought we were going crazy at this point, and now our proof of last time had been deleted. To the right of the front door was a small addition to the house. A medium-sized tool shed painted brownish red with a door to match. My dad noticed the door was ajar at the top, seemingly kicked in but never fully intruded upon. Even though we were told not to enter the house, at this point with all these weird things happening, he couldn't resist, and I was burdened to follow. The mystery of this house was too enticing, and we'd only scratched the surface. He handed me the camera and pushed in at the top of the old wood, bending it in the frame until it gave way a little more and allowed him to squeeze through. I waited on the outside, chilled and nervous, when I heard him exclaim, "Holy shit." I shouted back at him, asking what it was, and he simply told me to come in. I followed his means of entry, and at first I didn't see what the big deal was. There were loads of empty paint cans, a workbench, pile of metal, and, well, just behind the metal, a large cast iron furnace. The exact furnace that appeared in one of our photos. Now, this shed had no windows aside from one small window looking out to the back of the house towards the porch. We never looked in that window. We didn't realize it was there until we could look out it from the inside. We had to use flashlights to see our feet during this dismal winter day. So we had no way of seeing or knowing that this furnace was in here. But there it was. What confused us even more was that as it existed now, physically, it was absolutely covered in scrap metal and junk, buried. But in the photo, it stood alone, phased through an empty wall at the complete other end of the house. We were baffled, simply baffled. My dad advanced to the one other door in the shed which connected directly to the main house, but it wouldn't open. With that, we left the shed and collected ourselves, not wanting to dig too deep into this mystery for fear of our safety. The presumed owner's words echoing in our heads of "do not enter the house" just felt too powerful to force our way in. Not to mention, if we did, my dad could lose his job. Last thing I remember about this house is finding the electric meter and seeing it spike random numbers when I got close. Even though the house was supposedly dead for that many years, it reacted to my presence. We left soon after and discovered nothing unusual about this set of photos. Though I did debate on seeing a face embedded in the arm of the couch from the first set. I can picture it clearly, even right now, but I can't confirm it wasn't just the fabric wrinkled in such a way in my imagination hyping it up as something that didn't actually exist. At the end of the story, my dad tried getting a hold of this guy, but the number was disconnected, and even the company had no way of reaching him, so I have nothing more on this house.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing your experience. If anyone would like to listen to Chris's other stories, you can find him on Spotify at Archive of the Unexplainable, and you can also find a link to his page in the show notes. As tonight's edition of Paranormal Mysteries comes to a close, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in, and a special thank you goes out to Stevie Lee, Kyle, and Chris for sharing their experiences. If you've witnessed something that you can't explain, please write to me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or by visiting our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. Or if you prefer to record your experience and send it to me, you can now do this on our website as well. You can also visit speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries and record your story there. And don't forget that all of our links can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy rest of the week, and we'll see you back here on Friday as we uncover more experiences involving paranormal mysteries.